Okay. All right. Well, we'll make a start now. Okay. All right. Well, as I say, welcome everybody to paediatric teaching. And today, instead of talking about a particular disease, I wanted to talk a bit about the paediatric curriculum and how to learn paediatrics. That's what I wanted to sort of cover today. Now, the paediatric curriculum, as I said, is vast and it covers all the different common and less common diseases in paediatrics, and we'll talk about them throughout the year. But I want to try to talk today about the way in which you can learn paediatrics and child health, and maybe it might help you in developing your plan for learning for the year. That's really what I wanted to do today. All right. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the paediatric curriculum as we go. I'm going to discuss how to learn. I'm going to say something about supervision and teaching and mentorship so that you understand what those terms are and how they're different. And finally, to remember that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and I'll explain what I mean by that as we go. Well, first of all, how to learn. As I said, there's not one way to learn paediatrics, and you don't just learn it by reading a book or reading a textbook or something like that. There's so many different ways to learn, and I think you have to incorporate all of these different ways in your year. All right, it don't have to be done every week, but try to incorporate some of these different ways to learn. And then I find if I hear something or watch a video or see a patient with a particular disease and then read up on it, if you can possibly, there's a couple of people that coming online now, so I might wait for Nao and Roy to come online. Yeah. Okay. So we just for those who've just joined us, we're just talking about how to learn paediatrics, and as I say, there's so many different ways to learn. I mean, the most important way probably is to learn at the bedside, and I think our patients can teach us so much. And there's many ways in which you can learn at the bedside, but that's first and foremost. Secondly, I think we should carry a guideline with us when we are working, when we are looking after patients, and refer to it often. And you need to refer to it often. You need to know the structure of the guideline. You need to know how to navigate it and how to find the things you need, the information that you need. And that guideline could be like the Paediatric Standard Treatment book or the Hospital Care for Children book, or it could be a drug doses book. You might carry more than one, but you need to really be an expert in the use of that guideline. Come to weekly lectures, that's a good thing. And you might have lectures in your hospital, or you can come to the weekly lectures we have in paediatrics. You read a paediatric textbook. I'll talk a bit more about that and what books are good. You need to be involved in case presentations and case discussions. They can be informal or they can be more formal. I think you need to keep a logbook, and I'll explain why. I learn a lot about paediatrics from morbidity and mortality meetings, and I think you should make an effort in your hospital to do them as best as you can and learn the lessons from them and communicate those lessons to your staff. I'll explain that in a little while. You should, once you get a bit experienced with pediatrics, then you can use the opportunity to teach others. And even when you're starting in the Diploma of Child Health, you can start teaching nursing staff about basics of pediatrics. And those who are more advanced through the years of the MMed can teach the residents or the medical students or the nursing staff or anyone really, teach your peers about pediatrics. And you learn a lot by teaching other people. You could, as you're getting towards the exams, or maybe even early on, join a study group, because it's good if you can learn a lot by yourself, but you can learn even more, and it's more fun if you're in a study group. So I'd encourage you, if you're in a hospital that has got more than one postgraduate trainee, then join a study group with that person, and maybe even you could have a study group on Zoom. There are ways to do it now that we didn't have before. So try to join a study group that discusses lots of things, and it's a good way to support each other. You can read journals, and I'll explain a couple of journals that are good to read. about paediatrics. Simple, well, the ones that I think are probably the best. And you need to do your research project, right? And you can learn a lot about paediatrics by doing your research project. And yeah, and then there's online resources and podcasts and that sort of thing. Then you notice I put that last. And a lot of people might think, well, in these days, you learn so much by looking at the internet. But actually, I think you'll learn more by doing these other things than you will by searching the internet all the time. If you've got a particular question, then it's good to search the internet. But I don't think just, browsing the internet is a very good way to learn about paediatrics. It's just one way, but there's many other ways. Okay, right. To learn at the bedside, I think you need to learn how to talk to children. And there's lots of different skills, clinical skills you need, but often we don't talk too much about learning how to talk to children. And this might seem, you might think this is obvious and you do it well, but I see a lot of people who are, a lot of senior doctors actually, who don't actually know how to talk to children. And so they don't put the children at ease and the mothers or the fathers at ease. And they don't, and sometimes the children are scared, so they don't get as much information as what they could, either from a history or an examination. And so I think you need to learn how to talk to children. So these are just some tips that I use. It's very simple, but I always try to ask them familiar questions that make the child feel safe, right? It's not just about making them feel, not just about getting information, it's about making them feel safe, because the hospital is a foreign environment. It's often a scary environment, especially from kids from the village or kids who are not used to being in a hospital. And you have to behave in a way and communicate in a way that makes them feel safe. So in the morning, I tend to ask children, how did you sleep? You ask them familiar questions that other people would ask them, like in their home. How did you sleep? Are you hungry this morning? Have you eaten? That sort of thing. They're familiar questions, so they understand that people who are looking after them would ask those questions. You see, I sometimes tell them the time of day, or the day or the time. It depends how old they are, but I often try to orientate children, like, I'll tell them it's Wednesday morning at, and it's 9 o'clock, and you're in the hospital. So I try to just tell them those things. You don't have to do that every day, but just occasionally it's useful to orientate children, that they appreciate that too, I think, because it makes them feel safe. It makes them feel that they understand where they are. You can talk to them about the weather. If there's been big storms at night, I talk to them about, I just tell them there was lots of storms overnight, or I point out the window and say the sun's up and it's going to be a hot day. Something simple, simple comments that they would be familiar with. Ask them about things you think they know about, right? So all children, as they get to the age of 3 or 4 or 5, they all know about their brothers and sisters, and so I ask them about their siblings. Do you have brothers or sisters at home? And then if they do, then you can ask them, are they bigger than you or smaller than you? Are they what are their names? So most children at sort of 4 or 5 or older, of course, can answer those questions. And it shows you're interested in them as a person, and it helps to put them at ease. Or you might ask them about their pets, or what they like at school or sports, if they're older children, for example. You should compliment them sometimes on their clothes, like if they're wearing a nice shirt, or they've obviously just got dressed in the morning at the hospital, then just say that's a nice shirt, or compliment them on their nail polish or on the way they've done their hair if they've just had a wash. It helps to put them at ease. I try to reassure children that they'll be home soon and that the parent will be with them all the time. And of course, you don't say that if they're not going to be home soon, but for children that are going to be home in the next week or so, you need to reassure them that, because they don't know. They're in hospital. They don't know whether they'll ever get home again, or if their parent's not there, whether they'll see their parent again. So you need to do that. And I always ask them if they have any questions, okay? Often we ask a parent, we think we're going well if we ask a parent if they have any questions, but also ask a child. I had a child just over the weekend in the ICU who was only 3, and that child had some questions, and I was able to talk to him just like this. All right, they're simple questions, but still it puts children at ease. Okay. Now, the second thing is, after learning how to talk to children, you need to learn how to examine children. And I'm not going to go through all the examination things, but this is like, if you get these basics right, then I think that learning the clinical examination, learning history taking is so much easier, right? The first thing is in learning how to examine children is to get down to their level, right? Some of you might see me examining children, and I often get on my knees, or I often kneel down at the bedside, and that's because if you're at their eye level, then it's not threatening to children. If you stand above them and look down on them, then that's actually quite threatening. And it's also a bit for older children, it's a bit disrespectful, I think. And if you get down to their eye level, then you're talking to them one-on-one. And if they're small babies, then and they have stranger anxiety, if you get down to their level, they're less likely to see you as a dangerous stranger. So try to do that. You can see this is Janella Solomon from Honiara, and I thought this was a nice picture of the way she examined this particular child. So this child is like over 9 months, so has stranger anxiety, and the child's being comforted by the mother, and Janella is showing is at her level and showing her a balloon, so she might be interested in that, you see. So 1, it's non-threatening. 2, you get more clinical information, because it's the only way you can actually do a proper clinical examination on a child who's awake and conscious and is old enough to have stranger anxiety. And the other thing is, if you lean over the bed of children and examine them leaning over the bed, you're going to do your back in. And take it from me, for someone who's got not a very strong back, it's really important that we get our posture right when you're young, and try to protect your back. All right, I think it's very important for doctors, especially pediatricians, who end up sort of leaning over patients a bit. Try to protect your back as you go on. Now, when you're doing examinations, again, I'm not going to go through the abdominal and neurology. We'll do that later. But you need to be opportunistic. All right, so examine the parts you can examine at the time that you have an opportunity to. But you need to be systematic, and that is, you need to have examined as much as you can, and then you need to be able to communicate it in a systematic way. Even if you didn't do it in the right order, you need to be able to communicate it in the right order. And the more you practice this, then the better you'll be at this. And then try to be fun. It's actually a lot of fun examining and talking to children. So learn to enjoy it. Okay. I won't talk more about examining children or learning at the bedside or any of those things now, but I think you can see that if you master these things, then all the other technical things become a bit easier. Right. I said that you should carry a guideline with you and refer to it often. Now, you should carry that. In Solomon Islands, you've got the standard treatment book. In PNG, there's a standard treatment book of common illnesses of children. You should carry that with you and refer to it often. And then there's the pocket book of hospital care for children, which has a lot of information that you can use. So have your own copy of these, carry it with you, and learn the structure and how to navigate the book. So learn how to find different things within it, learn how to make diagnoses and find treatments in the book. And if it's relevant to you, as in you've got a good Android phone or you've got an iPhone, then get the app version. And so there's an app version for the pocketbook of hospital care for children. And like, I don't think using just online resources is a very good approach, but online resources can be complementary to using guidelines and other resources. Right. Now, I wanted to talk about a pediatric textbook, because at some stage in your training, you need to read from the start to the end of a good pediatric textbook. And the reason for that is that if you do that, then it forces you to read about things that you wouldn't normally read about, okay? And I think unless you do that, then there's always gaps in your knowledge. Now, there's always gaps in our knowledge anyway, but it's a good way to fill in the gaps, to start at the start and go to the end of a pediatric text. And in my training, I did that, and I made notes, and you make notes on each of the chapters in the book, and it just is a way of disciplining yourself to fill in those gaps. Okay. Now, I think there's three, more than one, but there's at least three good pediatric textbooks. The first one is the Illustrated Textbook of Paediatrics, and I think this is probably the best. It's the best one because it's the cheapest one, and it's the most up-to-date one, right? This is from the UK, and it's only, I looked just this week, and it's only $60, 60 Australian dollars. So that's a pretty good price. You can buy that through Booktopia or Amazon or those online bookshops. There's many ways to buy it. Then there's a book called Practical Paediatrics, which is an Australian book, and I think that's very good too, but it's much more expensive, and the last edition was 2012. I wrote a chapter for this, so I think it's a good book, but I actually think the Illustrated Textbook of Paediatrics is probably better. It's got some really nice pictures in it. This is the one with the sunflower on the front. I think it's a very good book, so I'd recommend that. And then there's another one called Essential Paediatrics and Child Health, which is also reasonably cheap, $70, and it's from the UK and from Israel. It's a very good general pediatric textbook, but again, this is the last version of that was in 2011. Now, all of these books you can buy online, but I would recommend getting this one. I think Dr. Gordon Pukai's got this book. I remember I got it for him a couple of years ago, and I think it's been useful. So there's copies of this around. But as part of your training, you don't have to do it all in a hurry, but as part of your training, at some year, you should start at the start and go to the end of a pediatric textbook, right? Now, there's lots of online resources for pediatrics, and I just would refer you to the Paediatric Society website, because we put a lot of online resources there, a lot of guidelines, and there's also Pediatrics for Doctors in Papua New Guinea. That whole book is online, as well as the Standard Treatment Manual and Hospital Care for Children. The books are online there, and you can download them. As well, on the Paediatric Society website is the curriculum, the Diploma of Child Health and the Master of Medicine curriculum, and you can find that on the website. There's also the National Child Health Plan, which is was revised in 2015, and we've just about to complete the 2022 revision, if you like. And that's a good, it's a relatively short document, but it covers all of pediatrics in PNG, and I think it's a very good basis, a good background for child health in PNG. It's got a lot of sort of basic data that it's good to know. Then we've got on the website, we've got tools for pediatric surveillance, the pediatric hospital reporting system, and we've got tools on how to run M&M meetings. And as I said, I'll talk a bit about this later, but I feel that we learn a lot by well-conducted morbidity and mortality meetings. Right. So these are the guidelines that are on the Paediatric Society website. I won't go through them again, but as well as the ones I mentioned, there's also guidelines for drug-resistant TB. There's guidelines for the HIV guideline is there. There's weight for age charts and a variety of different growth monitoring resources. There's the Child Health Record Book. And the pediatric cancer protocols that Dr. Anger has developed. There's also some resources for child protection, other nutrition things, oxygen. So you can see, if you go onto the website and have a look at those resources, you can learn a lot, I think. Yeah, and they're quite targeted and relevant to your training. There's also a lot of training modules on the Paediatric Society website, and the training modules are in the form of the Hospital Care for Children training course. And I won't go through all of this today, but it's a training course that teaches people how to use the Hospital Care for Children book. And it just does case-based training that each of these chapters has a different module. And we've run these training courses in a variety of different provinces and for health workers, but you can also just use it for self-learning. You could go through each of these different chapters in the book and go through the cases in the PowerPoint presentations that are there. Now, of course, some of this we're going to cover in the lectures we give throughout the year, but I just wanted you to know that all of these resources are actually on the Paediatric Society website. Now, I won't say too much about child morbidity and mortality meetings today, except that often we think of them as a quality improvement process of something that's important or that we have to do, but actually they can be a very important part of learning. And I think they should have a very strong educational value. And so when you're running your M&M meetings, you should try to think to whoever's coordinating them should think to themselves, well, what can we learn from these cases and what generalizable lessons can we learn and how can we communicate that? There's lots of, you should use these meetings as very much education for staff, I think. Lots of clinical lessons. You can read around the diseases that you see or the children have that the cases you're presenting. We'll talk more about M&M meetings in another lecture later on, but just to say that I think they're an important part of your training to learn through M&M meetings. There's on the Paediatric Society website, we've got lots of tools for running M&M meetings, and you don't need to use these tools. Really, M&M meetings are about telling a story, conveying the facts, learning the lessons from the meeting, and communicating those. But if you want to, you can use these resources. There are forms that you can use that help guide such a meeting. So I won't go through any more about that now, but just those resources are on the website. There are also on the website, which I think are useful to read, the annual child morbidity and mortality reports, and these have a lot of clinical recommendations for child health workers. They're very standard and important recommendations that have come out of the analysis of data each year. And I just encourage you perhaps to read one of the morbidity and mortality reports, perhaps the 2021. You should maybe download that and read it. It's not very long, maybe 30 pages, and you can, I'll just admit Natalie, she's come on. I'll just wait a moment while Natalie joins. Hello, Natalie. We're just talking about different ways to learn today, yeah, okay. Now, after I said that another way to learn is case presentations and discussions, and you should aim to present. I think it's a good idea if all the registrars present one case a month. It doesn't have to be, as I said, very formal, but you could present to your department, you could present to your colleagues. I mean, I think it's very useful to have, clinical case discussion meetings where you present a case and then there's a discussion about how you're going to manage the patient. Yeah, especially difficult cases for which you need some input from other people. So try to start some clinical case discussion meetings. I think they're very, very useful. You don't need to have done a big systematic review or literature search. Sometimes it's just good enough to present the case in detail, have a little bit of background about the disease, and then open it up for discussion and questions, because then you can get a lot of inputs regarding management, I think. Yeah. Okay. Now, related to sort of case discussions and things, I think everybody should keep a logbook. And we introduced logbooks at maybe, it was about 2015, I think, and they've been taken up by some people and not by others. But you shouldn't, I don't want you to see it as a chore, as like a task that's difficult to do. I think it should be something that really helps you, because it's a bit like a diary. It's like having a diary, your own journal of the cases that you've seen and the lessons that you've learned from them. And if you have a logbook, then you can refer back to a certain case that you've seen that might be similar to one that you're seeing now. I won't go through all of this, but you know, and it's not something you have to fill out like in 6 months or even a year. It's something that you should build up throughout the 5 years of your paediatric training, commencing in your Diploma of Child Health year, and then by the end of the 5 years of your training, by the time you finish your masters, then you should have a logbook that's full of cases that you've seen and you've managed and that have taught you something. I think it's useful. The logbook's also an important way of recording the procedures that you've learnt and practiced, the courses you've attended, and your research projects, particularly the procedures. Logbooks, we got the idea from about logbooks mostly from like anaesthetic trainees and surgical trainees, because they have to keep a logbook of the operations they've done or the anaesthetics they've given. And I think it should be the same in paediatrics. We do procedures, various procedures at different times, and we learn new skills like ultrasound or doing echoes, and we should record that, not so much for your like assessment, but for yourself, so that you can know how you're going with your the skills you're learning. So it's mostly for you. It's also for your supervisor and for the assessors as well, right? Okay. So as I said, why a logbook? Well, it is like a diary. It's your own personal reflections on cases and hold on, I'll just admit, Andre, your own personal record of the cases you've seen and the lessons you've learned. And I can't remember everything. I forget cases that I've seen, after a few weeks sometimes, and I think it's useful to write them down. And what happens is that you build knowledge as you go on, and the logbook is not even just for your training, but you might want to continue it as you after your postgraduate training, because one case then informs the next and the next and the next, and you just build up it's like a library in your mind and sometimes on paper about all the cases you've seen, and then you can refer back to them the next time. This is a really important way to learn. If you want to be a really good clinician, then you have to have like a library of cases in your mind, right? And it starts with the first case you see when you're starting your Diploma of Child Health, and then it goes all the way through your training. Now, I said that a good way to learn is to read pediatric journals. Now, I think at some time it's good to at least scan through and read some articles in some pediatric journals. And the ones that I like to read, the pediatric ones that I like to read, firstly, Archives of Disease in Childhood. Now that's a UK, but it's an international journal, and I think it's very good for the pediatrician, for the pediatric registrars. It's got a lot of educative articles, and it also there'll be diseases and conditions that are relevant to PNG and the Pacific Island nations, but there'll also be diseases that are not really relevant, and that's useful too, because you can then read a bit about the conditions that are occurring in other countries, and maybe it opens your mind to the possibility that those conditions are also within your patient population, which they often are. I think it's good to have a slightly broader perspective about the cases that other countries are seeing as well. Pediatrics in International Child Health is more focused on, I suppose, developing countries, and that's a very good journal, I think. And the Journal of Tropical Pediatrics, which is now just an online journal, but that has a lot of pediatric topics that are relevant to tropical countries. So those three journals are very complementary, I think. Now, not all the articles in these journals will be freely accessible, but many of them are. And I only include these three journals because most of the articles that many of the articles that you'll read in these journals are freely accessible. Now, journals, these 3 journals plus hundreds of other journals can be freely accessed online through a program called HINARI, the Health Information Access to a Research Initiative, HINARI. And this is an initiative by WHO. And I know that, for example, the School of Medicine has a HINARI username and password. And some of the provincial hospitals also have that. But if you have a librarian at your hospital, or you have a library, then the librarian might be able to help you getting a username and password for HINARI, and then you can get journal articles if you want to. If your hospital hasn't signed up for HINARI, then you should ask your Director of Medical Services or someone senior in your hospital if they could sign up the hospital for HINARI, and so you could access journals that way. But increasingly in some journals, like in Archives and in Paediatrics and International Child Health and Journal of Tropical Paediatrics, you don't even need to go through HINARI, but you can find the freely accessible online articles. I think it's good to maybe once a month have a read a journal article if you can. Okay. So I've talked about all the different ways of learning. I'll go through them again perhaps at the end for those who just joined, but I wanted to just say something about supervisors and teachers and mentors. And you all have your supervisors, the paediatricians who are supervising you, and so the paediatricians who are supervising you. There's a difference between a supervisor and a teacher. A supervisor can be just someone who instructs you and who assesses you, but a teacher will teach you in lots of different ways, in formal and informal ways. And then a mentor is a bit different still. A mentor has a supportive and advising relationship, often when you ask questions or you have some questions to ask. A mentor might be your supervisor or a teacher. There might be someone who's teaching you pediatrics, or they might be just another senior trainee or a recent graduate, a new pediatrician, or even a very experienced pediatrician, a mentor who mentors you through. But having a mentor is a bit different to having a supervisor. It could be the same person who does all 3 jobs, right, for you. But you should seek out someone who's interested in you as a person and interested in your career and is there to help you, okay? So I think we need to, make sure that people are properly supervised and properly taught and properly mentored. And so when you graduate as a pediatrician, you have those skills to do that for your junior staff as well. So I'm just going to let someone else in now. Okay. Now, I've nearly finished actually, but perhaps I've nearly finished. But and there's a few people, I'm sorry, just came on quite late, but I've recorded this talk and I'll put it up online so you can, for those who missed the first half, you can see it. But the last thing I wanted to say is that postgraduate training, this is the first lecture for the year, and we'll talk more about diseases and things as we go along, but I just wanted to say that postgraduate training is a marathon, not a sprint. All right, you don't have to do everything at once. All right, you can take your time. You should be kind to yourself. Right, everybody's got lots of other things that they have in their lives, their families, their friends, and so you need to look after the other important things and the people in your life. That's a very important part of pediatric training. You should be happy and enjoy your training because it's fun. You shouldn't try to rush through it, but try to enjoy it as much as possible. Enjoy the people around you. Enjoy the way you enjoy your colleagues and enjoy the staff you work with, and even enjoy and get the most out of your patients and their families. You can learn a lot personally from your families, I think. Now, sometimes pediatric training is pretty tough. Sometimes it's sad and sometimes it's confronting. We might have a child who dies and it makes us a bit sad. And sometimes you might even doubt yourself. You might even think, I can't do this. I can't be a good pediatrician or a good doctor. That's the way it is sometimes. You just, sometimes pediatric training can be tough, but there's always someone who can help you deal with that. All right, that's what's most important. That's why you have mentors and friends and supervisors and teachers. And so when things get a bit tough, then just know that there are people around to support you. Right? There'll be times when you might even need to take a break to deal with other things in your life. That happens to many people during their pediatric training, and it's not a failure. You can take a break and then get back to training, pediatric training, and you might miss out on an exam at some stage during your training. It doesn't matter. You just have to get back up and keep going. All right. You need to know there's always someone else around who can talk to you, and like I said, just like forming a study group, you need to look after each other. All right, in your training, there's a lot of people in pediatric training now. We've got more than 35 in the training program, from diploma through to masters, and people need to be aware of all the other trainees and know to be on the lookout for other people. Okay, right. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, but really I just wanted to talk about all the different ways you can learn pediatrics and maybe set the scene for what we can learn throughout the year. As I said, I'm sorry that some people came in the last 15 minutes and missed the first part, but I'll record it and it'll go up online at some stage, so you can watch it if you want to.